The Superman and Lois team warned us that the final season would be the death of Superman. But no one realized they were actually spoiling the series finale from the beginning. The CW's superhero era came to an end on Monday night with the poignant and powerful Superman and Lois series finale. It went by so fast. After yet another brutal showdown with Doomsday, Clark, Tyler Hoechlin, and Lois, Elizabeth Tulloch, exposed Lex Luthor's, Michael Cudlett's, evil plans to the world, finally sending him back to prison for life, this time for the crimes he did commit. Then, a year later, John Henry Irons, Wole Parks, and Lana Lang, Emmanuel Creaky, get married. And then the rest of Clark and Lois' lives together play out in a beautiful, sweeping montage spanning more than 32 years as Jordan, Alex Garfin, and Jonathan, Michael Bishop, grow up and have families of their own, and the entire Kent family works to make the world a better place until Clark and Lois' eventual and peaceful deaths. Lois goes first after her cancer comes back, and Clark, who has become totally human in his old age and was never the same after losing Lois, follows not long after, although they happily reunite in a form of an afterlife. That's what we were going for. Happy, sad, but something that stays with you for a while. Executive producer Todd Helbing tells Entertainment Weekly. Below, showrunners Helbing and Brent Fletcher and series stars Hoechlin and Tulloch break down that emotional series finale ending. How are you feeling about Superman and Lois coming to an end? Tyler Hoechlin. We're very, very fortunate to get to end the show. I know how it's ending now compared to how it could have ended had we not come back after Season 3 is pretty night and day. So I'm happy for the fans. They get a little bit of closure. Elizabeth Tulloch. It's a bummer. Not that we were technically still part of the Arrowverse, but it's also the end of the Arrowverse era, and also Smallville, I mean, if you really go back to the WB shows. But the CW is not really a thing anymore. So bookending it with Smallville, when the network began, and ending with Superman and Lois, it's sad, especially for genre fans who are so loyal and dedicated and smart. But I'm grateful that we had 4 seasons, and I'm grateful that we had the final season at least to close it out, and I hope that people like the ending. I think it'll probably be a little bit controversial. I was ugly crying, and it's so embarrassing when you're crying at your own performance. Was this always how you planned to end the show? Brent Fletcher. Pretty much. We talked at the end of Season 3. It was a version of this. It maybe had more bells and whistles after 7 seasons, and there was some changing due to production measures. But to see his life wind down and what it meant to him was always what we were hoping to do when we finished. Todd Helbing. In Season 3, with Bruno telling him that he hadn't really made a change, or as big a change as he could have, that was something that we were definitely going to explore. The way it worked out was probably a little bit different, but that was the theme that we wanted to hit for sure. How did that ending change when you found out you were only getting this 10-episode final season? Helbing, there were so many ways. 10 episodes instead of 13 or 15 made it a little tricky, and the cast reductions, obviously. But once we knew what their availability was and we started to plot it all out, it lined up with what Brent and I had plotted out in a lot of ways, oddly. Fletcher. We had story that we fast-forwarded a little bit because we knew it was the last season. Sarah in Navarrete, going off and studying in another country, we would have probably waited on that a little bit, but something like that would have been our goal. The same with Jonathan having powers. I think we would have waited. We never wanted it to be just the superpowers show. But because we knew it was the last season, we took some swings that we wouldn't have taken if it was going to continue, all in service of the grand ending. Why did you want to show both Lois and Clark's deaths? Fletcher. It was a choice that we made because we felt like we're the only Superman show that's ever been able to end on our own terms. We were like, why don't we show the totality of their lives? We had to fast forward through stuff, but we tried to give you a glimpse of the feel of what the decades looked like and the things that were important to them and the theme of the show, which is family and hope. They had so much of that in their later years. Those were the things that meant the most to them at the end, not stopping a Doomsday or stopping a Brainiac. That's not what he remembers when he shuffles off the mortal coil. He remembers his grandkids and moments of forgiveness, and his friends, and all the things that are good and right in the world. Helbing. At the beginning of the season, there was a lot of press about Death of Superman, and we knew we were doing that. But we were doing the Death of Superman, the whole thing. We were talking more about the ending than the beginning of the season. One of our mantras was, how can we twist some of these stories on their head and do a different version of it. So this was sort of the same thing. When did you learn how the show was going to end? Hoechlin laughs when I read it. I mean, I had an idea. They had given us a clue as to how they were going to do it, but the details of it I really didn't know until I read the final script. Part of it was the last thing we ever shot, and it was really evolving throughout the whole process. And now that it's done, and I've seen at least a rough version of it, I'm really happy with how they decided to wrap everything up. It feels very fitting for this version of the characters and the circumstances being what they were, and knowing that we were ending the show, to really have this finality to it. Tulloch, we had been told by higher-ups to anticipate going 7 or 8 seasons, and so all of a sudden having it cut down to one final, shortened season where they have to wrap everything up, they did what they could. But I know that the ending specifically was probably the plan for a couple seasons down the road, whenever it was going to end. The challenge was fitting in as much of their grand plans as possible when you're dealing with budget cuts and fewer episodes. What did you think of how the rest of Clark and Lois' lives played out over the next 32 years together, and how they never spent a day apart until the day Lois died? Tulloch, well, my initial thought was, wait a minute. What if Max wants to pick us up? Laughs, anything could happen. It's been number 2 or 3 after the Penguin in South America, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, and it's doing so well that I was kind of having pipe dreams about maybe it's not over. But I also thought it was beautiful. We shot that scene absolutely last, and so it was emotional for everyone who was there. There were actors who weren't in the scene who wanted to be there for the last scene that we shot on the show, and the crew was emotional. When I read the script, I was tearing up, and then I was tearing up even more when I was filming it and watching Tyler's stuff. I think the fans love this iteration of Lois and Clark because there's no worry or hesitation or concern about whether or not they're madly in love with each other.